My name is Adam Phillips. I was trained as a child psychotherapist and I worked in the National Health Service for 17 years. And for the last 18 years, I've been a psychoanalyst in private practice and a writer. Welcome to my ex. I think that the reason affection is important, at least to me, is because I think, for me, a good life is an affectionate life, essentially. And I think that affection, at least in English, is a very interesting word because it overlaps with a lot of other things that it's different from. Because we know, as children, that it's in some ways misleading to think of children and parenting as sexual. Now, clearly there are erotic elements in it, but it's presidingly, actually, at its best, an affectionate relationship. And in affection, it seems to me, there is an acknowledgement of mutual vulnerability. So children begin, ideally, in an affectionate world. Now, if you want to get a sense of the perils of this, you might think of tickling. Because tickling, as a process, begins as an act of sort of affection. But of course, it very quickly tips over into something that is like torture. Because in tickling, there's no climax, but you can exploit somebody's desire for affection in such a way that they suffer acutely. So that one of the things I think I want to talk about is, first of all, what our fears are of affection. And I think these fears are to do with the way in which it can be exploited. That is to say, somebody can seduce us by being initially affectionate when actually they have all sorts of other desires that they're using the affection as a means to. At its best, and again, I think social distancing has revealed this, at its best, affection that is trustworthy is something that is actually genuinely heartening and fortifying. That if people can rely on the affection of others and their own affection, they feel much closer and less threatened. They feel much more as if they're in a shared world. I think we recognize affection very early on in children's, and indeed adults and children's, natural tendency to be in some sort of gentle physical contact with each other. That there's something very fundamental about that basic physical closeness that is both, on the one hand, reassuring, because it's as though there is some base or foundation in the relationship, which is to do with the genuine mutual sensual pleasure. It's not about a climax, that's not about overexcitement, indeed it's not about that much excitement at all, but it's some fundamental form of comfort. And I think clearly something about affection probably reproduces something of what might have been experienced in the womb, which is being held, being contained, being physically held together. I mean, you can see, when someone holds a child, there is a mutual accommodation of two bodies going on. That's a very good picture of affection. Whereas when it's bullying, the adult holds the child firmly. There's no mutual accommodation going on. So one of the things about the initial affectionate relationship is that there's mutual accommodation, that people are attuned to what the other wants and likes and is frightened of. So there's no bullying, there's no humiliation, and there's no excess. It's mutually paced. And it's non-possessive. In other words, I won't demand that my child goes on cuddling me more than they want to. So the child might come for a cuddle and then go off and do something else. And she must be free to do that, as though the affection is like a kind of refueling, or just a reassurance, or a going back to base camp. And then the child goes on from there. So ideally, affection doesn't addict someone, it frees them. It gives them a bodily confidence in the world to go and do other things. Well, I think in sexual abuse, what we see, so to speak, is the adult's need for something involving the exploitation of the child's wish for affection and connection. Now, in my experience, anybody who abuses a child has themselves been abused, which is why punishing abusers is so terrible in its way. But I do think that this is, in a way, if you like, one of the roots of abuse, which is people who've experienced adults who use affection as a seduction towards sexual gratification. So everything depends upon the extent to which the affection is being used to do something, whether it's a means to an end, other than a means to the end of sort of basic bodily confidence. Because whenever affection is used to do something else, it, in a sense, it's no longer affection. It's something else. But I think in terms of, as it were, treating someone who is abusive or has been abused, it's very much about, on the one hand, reconstructing the history of how this has come about, of why it came to this, and also, insofar as it's possible, of re-establishing trust. Because for an abusive or abused person, the unconscious assumption is that whatever the relationship is like, there are really only two positions. There's the abuser and the abused. So everything's going to turn into that. So there's an immediate narrowing of the repertoire, which of course is necessary because somebody has to be alert and vigilant to protect themselves. Because the abuser only feels safe from being abused if they are abusive. So it's very much to do with safety, this, and to do with kind of emotional and psychic survival, even though terrible things are done in the name of these things. That these are not evil people. They're people who've come up with these particular self-cures to very difficult early predicaments. And part of the self-cure has involved the exploitation of affection. And once you exploit someone's affection, you effectively exploit their innocence. You rob them of their innocence. And innocence here means fundamental trust, unsuspicious trust.